Today, we're talking about episode 20, the role of personal stories in research. Our guest that day was Sarah Pott. She is an educator and facilitator with CanChild, which is a research center focused on pediatric disability that's housed within McMaster University. So, Mike, what resonated for you in that conversation?
Yeah, man. Well, I loved the conversation you guys had about using digital storytelling in educational context, like in particular, building curriculums. And I love how she said, at first we thought we'd make these digital stories and we just sort of plop them into the curriculum where we thought they fit. And then she said, after we watched the stories, we were like, no. We actually need to build the entire curriculum around the
Mhm.
stories. And I love that because that's happened to me 15 times, where people will say, Mike, we want some digital stories to contextualize our curriculum. And then they watch the stories and they're like, we're going to totally redo our curriculum around the stories. Like that happens pretty much all the time. And I love that, right? I love that idea that, what we think people need to know and what they actually need to know based when we actually listen to their stories is totally different. And it's actually more, I would say, more powerful, more beneficial when it's driven by the people that you're trying to educate, right? You've
Mhm.
listened to the stories of these patient engagement researchers, right? And then you understand, what do they need to know? Versus, here's what we want to teach people. Now let's go get stories that fit in with this teaching. Right.
Mhm.
And that's to me, it's a more emergent and organic form of adult education. And ultimately, when you want to, influence adults, right, and teach them things and get them to behave differently, it's always better to start with them. Right. It's never good to start with what you want to teach them. You got to ask them, what do you want to know? What matters to you? And so I love that part of the conversation just because I saw it reflected in so many ways in my own experience. And one of those ways, and I'll just share this quick story, is I created some digital stories with a very large organization, not-for-profit organization in the country, and they were very unsure at the beginning
Mhm.
about the whole process because they were like, so we can't control what people say, like what if they say things that don't align with our organizational values? And I'm like, well, if you choose people who have been impacted by your programs, they will talk about the ways it has benefited them, right? If you select the right participants, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So afterwards, we watched all the stories, and the vice president of this organization who's in charge of programs came up to me after and said, Mike, I learned so much about our programs from watching these stories, and this is the vice president in charge of programs, right? And again, we have these ideas of what we think our organization does or what we think our programs do. But when we ask participants and get them to tell a story about their experience of that program, we get a whole totally new understanding of what they actually do, not what we think they do, but what they actually do. And so she learned so much about her programs from watching these stories, and it was because they trusted their stakeholders to tell
Mhm.
stories that would help them help support the organization. And so I love that idea of trust, right? And CanChild really trusts the people they work with. They're embodying these principles of patient and family engagement in research by trusting them to tell a story that will help others understand what that process is like. So I love it. I love that, and of course I'm really nerdy, so I could talk forever about it. But those are some of the big things that stood out to me.
Perfect. So we were talking about episode 20, the role of personal stories in research. Go have a listen to that podcast. There are digital stories connected to it. You can find all the links in the show notes.